Okay then, gents, let's focus on the big one. US men's national team against Mexico. Let's preview this huge rivalry clash in World Cup qualifying. Christian Pulisic is back. That's huge news for the USA. Of course, gives them a massive boost. But ahead of this game in Cincinnati, I mean, I'm absolutely buzzing over here in England to watch this. Guys, you must be absolutely excited over there, through the roof, I can imagine. Because the USA, they've had Mexico's number in the Nations League and the Gold Cup in recent seasons. So, Andy Edwards, is it a bit too early here to say that this rivalry is turning in the US men's national team's favor? Because it seems like Mexico's a little bit scared of the USA right now.
I wouldn't say they're scared. I don't want to poke them before having to face them on Friday. This is still a really, really good Mexican team, and for all the talk about, the U.S. has players at this club and that club and this club, there's a lot of really big clubs that Mexican players are at now as well, and they're producing as well. They're playing consistently. They're getting on the score sheet fairly regularly, and so this is a very even matchup to me. I think in terms of kind of the rivalry and who's got the best of it at the moment, it is the U.S. based on what they were able to do over the summer, but it comes with a bit of an asterisk still for me. The fact that one of them was a Gold Cup final, it was a B team for the U.S. Obviously, the A team for Mexico, or close to an A team for Mexico, I'll say. But it's just different when you've got A team versus A team. You've got a place in World Cup qualifying on the line. You get two cracks at the most hated rival. You get them once at home. You get them once at their place. This is just a different level of competition than what we saw in the summer. I don't care that it was the Nations League final. That's a new competition. This is World Cup qualifying. These are the two games that the fan bases and I think as well the players still, and maybe even more so now than in very recent years where it seemed to die down a little bit. There's so many players on both sides at roughly the same age. So they're familiar with one another for quite a while. They've been playing against each other for a number of years. They're now playing against each other on the club stage and the international stage. And so it's starting to have that feel once again where it feels like US-Mexico almost never stops. There's always something in the rivalry going on between when they're actually playing on the field. And so now we get them back on the field this week. And yeah, I'm a little bit excited. I'm really, really excited. I had to throw on a little American flagged undershirt here just to start the week right, because this is the biggest game of Berhalter's tenure so far. And it's arguably the biggest game of every World Cup cycle, because if you can win at home against Mexico, you're probably going to get there. I know what happened last time, All
right. Andy's getting in the spirit of things there. Nick, what about you? Are you feeling pretty confident and excited about this game?
I was. I was. I'll tell you what I worry about. I worry about the fact that we have gone from John Brooks, who hasn't played well in a U.S. shirt, being on the roster or in the starting lineup, to John Brooks not even being available. Like, if things go bad for them at the back, they can't even say, well, let's see if this old recipe works again, because Raul Jimenez hasn't been around for most of these games, and he looks pretty good for Wolves right now. I also think, as good as Matt Turner's been and Zach Steffen re-upping at Man City, Mexico still has a very tested keeper back there who can rob a game and has robbed games in the United States before. So I think it's a very, very, very challenging match, and I'm pretty worried about it. I think I said this last time we spoke about the men's national team. For me, this is one of those tipping point breaks where if they were to emerge with 4 or 6 points here, I think I'm like, all right, cool. Whatever happens at the World Cup, and maybe even beyond that, as long as Greg Berhalter doesn't, really make a massive mistake in selection before Qatar or Qatar. But if they lose, if they only win one of the games, if they don't look good, if they draw both, I'm going to feel like, what are we doing here? Because again, my stock, my measurement of how the United States men's national team progressing is if they are going to be a team that looks like they can do damage at a World Cup, not if they should get there, because they should always get there out of CONCACAF.
They should. And they sit in second place in the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying table heading into this game against Mexico. They're 3 points behind Mexico, who sit top. So this is the halfway point after this game. It's really interesting, I think, that, like you said, about how close these teams are. And the gap's definitely been closed. For most of the last decade, you say that Mexico was superior to the US men's national team. even if the US had some individual players, Tim Howard, Dempsey, others that always caused them problems. But now it's really, really close. And heading into this game, I want to focus on the defensive side of things. You mentioned it there, Nick, Raul Jimenez and Lozano and Jesus Corona, some of the great players that Mexico have up top. My worry is defensively because Sergiño Dest is missing through injury. Obviously, John Brooks didn't get called up. I mean, Andy, there's defensive question marks around this US team, isn't there? So is that the area of concern that you really a bit worried about, maybe Mexico taking advantage of those gaps?
Yeah, we've been talking about it all through the start of World Cup qualifying is at center back with John Brooks, and I think Nick did a pretty good job of kind of explaining what the progression in our thinking with John Brooks has been over the last few months, and it's now to a point where it's just like, okay, whatever, he's not there. I don't actually care. I don't think him being there has any more effect than him not being there at this point, given where kind of the team is. And that's not so much a judgment of him. That's just, I think Miles Robinson really stepped up during the last window. I think Walker Zimmerman stepped up during the last window. And those two have shown to be a pretty good pairing. And they're good, I think, stylistically for this matchup against Mexico. Very good in the air, very good at recovery defending, emergency defending, running back towards their own goal, which is much chaos as Mexico is going to be able to create and where they win the ball and getting quick counterattacks. That's going to be really important to have those two on top of their game. My real worry along the back line is over there at right back, and Sergiño Dest had just moved over and finally stopped playing there on left back, went to the right. We got Anthony Robinson in there at left back, who has looked fantastic for the U.S., for Fulham, anywhere that Anthony Robinson has played this season since the summer. He has looked really, really good. So that spot's locked down. I'm just a little worried about right back now because Dest defensively is not great, but the threat that he poses going forward, I think, is enough to keep either opposing wingers or certainly opposing fullbacks honest. It pins them back just a little bit more. And so there's going to be a little bit more freedom for Mexico going down the left side of their attack, the right side of the U.S.'s defense. And I can see him getting overloaded there. And so that almost forces Berhalter's hand into starting Paul Arriola again at the wing, or somebody who is going to play a defensive winger position in front of the fullback to get back there and just offer numbers. And so that limits the team defensively. And so you just see how the dominoes in a big game like this can really, one position can have an effect all over the field. And I think that's a big, big miss that really, at least on that half of the field, I think slants it in favor of Mexico.
That's a great point, Andy. Nick, I mean, at right back there, who do you think's going to come in for the injured Sergiño Dest? DeAndre Yedlin, with his experience, got Reggie Cannon, who's trusted by Greg Berhalter. Or then you have Joe Scally coming in, hasn't won a cap yet, but has been really good for Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Bundesliga. I mean, it's be a huge game to chuck Scally into, but US men's national team fans have been calling for him for a long time. He's been really, really good. Who would you go for? Because it's kind of a difficult one. And Berhalter, he's not afraid to chuck a youngster in, is he? We saw that with Ricardo Pepi and all these other players he's been throwing in at the deep end. So it's just going to be on the quality of the player rather than the experience, I feel like, right? Or does the occasion kind of come into the thinking here?
You know what? I grimaced when Andy was talking, and it wasn't because I disagreed with him. It was because a thought popped into my head. And it was, remember when Greg Berhalter told us Tyler Adams was a right back? Could you see him pulling that card out here? Gosh, I hope not, because I look at what Mexico can do, and it's the first time in 10 years I've said to myself, maybe not 10 years, but since Michael Bradley's very prime. And people like to forget how good he was when he was at his very, very best, maybe the Roma year, right? Michael Bradley helped them win the midfield battle. And since then, it's been Hector Herrera, and Edson Alvarez, and Andres Guardado, and so many good players. And not just because, listen, I know sometimes you interview a guy, right, and it ends up sticking in your head. I think the idea of Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams gives them a chance to win the midfield battle. And if that happens, it forces maybe Raul Jimenez to drop deeper than he wants to, and it forces those wingers to have to pick up the ball from different positions. It takes players like Yedlin and Robinson and allows them to maybe chase long balls that are trying to be sent over to their corners. So I like McKennie here. When I spoke with him, the one thing that really, really impressed me was how he thinks of their stature. I had asked him basically, you are a potential golden generation. We know that people say that, but also you're tasked with taking these guys you say you look up to, another Texan and Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan, although he didn't say great things about McKinney a couple months ago. You're tasked with putting this team back on a World Cup track. And what do you think of that? He jumped right to, I think about that a lot. I think about making this country fall in love with soccer, winning over new fans, mentioning all those things that are very distinctly U.S. soccer of 10 years ago. And if they're going to come into there with this angry, hungry mentality, which we've seen essentially every time, whether good or bad, Weston McKennie gets out there, with Tyler Adams sitting beneath them and Pulisic giving them as many minutes as they can, that I really do like their chances. But I do think it'll be the midfield battle that dictates whose back line is going to be under the most pressure. And I don't trust really either team's back line if they're under pressure.
Definitely. What an atmosphere it's going to be in Cincinnati, by the way. It's always enthralling. USA, Mexico, huge rivals. As I said, I think they're closer than ever, and the US are right on the cusp of overtaking Mexico for dominance in the region. That moves us nicely on to score predictions. What do we think? Who are you going with, Andy? You think the US are going to come out on top? I'll kick things off and say I think I'm going to sit on the fence and say it's going to be a draw. I think both teams have tough games after this. Mexico to Canada, USA to Jamaica. I think both teams will be like, you know what, we're both going to qualify. Let's take a draw and move on pretty swiftly. What do you think?
Obviously, the heart wants to say the heart wants to say 2-0, and we all know why, because it's happened so many times, and we have Dos Acero. I think this is a 1-0 game, and I think it's probably a late goal as well. I think it will be choppy, and it won't be the prettiest that we've seen, but there will be moments where that quality shines through, I think, for both sides. And there will be moments where it gets away from the fouls and the sloppiness in the middle of the field, and something spectacular almost comes off, or maybe it does. And we're just reminded, oh yeah, that's how good this game can be. That's how good when these two teams are both good together, because we forget that. It's nice when they're good together. It's nice to beat up on the rival a few times, but it's really fun when they're both good and competitive. So I think it's going to be a game that, that's going to really make us appreciate the two generations of US and Mexico players that we have. Nick,
what about you, mate?
I had been leaning towards a draw, but I can't do that. I can't, we got to mix it up a little bit. I think it's going to be yellow card fest. I think there's a good chance someone's going to be sent off, and I'm going to flip it on Andy just to be different. Maybe something crazy happens early because Mexico comes out of the gates so angry at losing 2 straight to the U.S. I haven't done the research, but there haven't been a lot of 3 straight wins for the U.S. against Mexico in this series, if any, right? So my prediction is going to be 2-1. And I'm going to give it to the good guys, but it's only because I want it and because Joe predicted a draw. So there's your hedge.
Yeah, there you go. We got all angles covered there. I want to let you in on a little story. When I first came to the US to play college soccer, I wore a Mexico jersey into the locker room because I loved the Mexico teams from the 90s and just really liked them. And my teammates, who were they were all from the USA, politely told me never wear that again. So that was my first taste of that rivalry, and not really knowing how big a deal it was growing up in Europe. And now we all know how big of a deal it is now, myself very much included in that.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host for NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch highlights all season long, and be sure to tune in for Premier League mornings every weekend at 7 a.m. Eastern. And for even more content, head over to Peacock, where we've got live games, original series, and a dedicated round-the-clock Premier League channel featuring studio shows, classic matches, and much more.